welcome to CGTN. This is our special coverage on China's political season, the 2 sessions. Live from Beijing, I'm Pan Deng.
And I'm Wang Mengmang. The National People's Congress, the legislature, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the top political advisory body, continue their annual meetings.
The 14th National People's Congress is now holding the 3rd plenary meeting of its first session at the Great Hall of the People. NPC deputies are set to vote upon several drafts concerning the country's future. They will also vote on the country's leadership.
That's right. And here in the studio, we have 2 guests to discuss today's proceedings. Professor Xia Lu from the School of Marxism Studies at Renmin University of China, and Professor Wang Xinsong is from the School of Social Development and Public Policy at Beijing Normal University. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
And this special coverage is also being live streamed on our social media platforms. You can also log on to our app to stay tuned. So we turn to Friday morning's big event. Our reporter Huang Yue joins us now from the Great Hall of the People in central Beijing. Hello, Huang Yue. Tell us more about the agenda for Friday morning.
Yes, good morning, Pan Deng. As we speak, the 3rd plenary meeting of the 14th National People's Congress has just kicked off here at the Great Hall of the People behind me, and all the nearly 3,000 deputies have gathered and seated for today's meeting. Actually, yesterday afternoon, when they were in their hotels for group meetings, they have conducted deliberations and consultations on the candidates for the president of the People's Republic of China. So later, during today's meeting, they will vote for the president, which will be closely watched both by the country and the world. Other things on today's agenda, deputies will vote on the draft decision of State Council Institutional Reform Plan, which has been unveiled on Tuesday with a focus on restructuring the Ministry of Science and Technology and establishing the National Financial Regulatory Administration. Deputies will also vote on the draft measures on elections and appointments, the draft list of co-chief scrutineers and other scrutineers, and then they will elect the president of the country, as we just mentioned. They will also elect the chairman of the Central Military Commission and the chairman, vice chairman, the secretary general of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress, and the vice president of the country. So all these are ongoing one by one at the Great Hall of the People here, and the results will be unveiled soon.
Thank you very much, our reporter Huang Yue at Great Hall of the People in central Beijing.
So today, a lot of items on the agenda, and now we want to get some analysis from our guests here. Professor, so this year's session, of course, holds special significance. As our reporter just mentioned, China will usher in a new lineup of leaders. Help us understand, especially our Western viewers, understand the special significance of the 3rd plenary meeting for the whole NPC session. Professor Xia.
Well, we have seen that there is a kind of a tight schedule and tight agenda for the 3rd plenary meeting of the NPC session today. So basically, it will employ the function of decision of the draft of the reform of the institutional kind of restructure of the state organ, and also the decision of the national leaders, not only the president, the vice president, but also the premier and the ministers of different ministries, and also the chairman of the CMC. Basically, it is a state apparatus, the restructure of the state apparatus will be decided today at a 3rd meeting of this kind of session.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Professor Wang, we know this year is the first to fully implement the guiding principles set at the 20th CPC National Congress last October. Remind our viewers of those guiding principles, and how will those principles form China's blueprint for the future?
Well, first of all, I think our viewers need to understand the basic characteristic of the Chinese political structure, where the party is in the leadership and providing directions and guidelines for the national development, whereas the government, also makes important policy decisions, but more or less, follow the directions and guidelines of the central party leadership. So last year, the Communist Party of China had the 20th Party Congress, during which the party set up a very clear blueprint for the next period of national development, and in which I think several priorities have been set up. For example, science and technology was given a very high priority, and also the national security was also raised to a new height in the 20th Party Congress report. And so we would expect to see that during this year's two sessions, both the NPC and the CPPCC National Committee will have very intensive discussion on these issues, along as well as other issues mentioned in the party's report. So, for example, in terms of the institution reform, Professor Xia just mentioned that we probably will see. We have seen the draft, and we probably will see the draft to be approved today, which would include very important institutional reforms regarding national security, science and technology, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, you mentioned institutional reform, and there's really a lot of discussion about how China is going to carry out institutional reforms to optimize the management structure and the governance system. And right now, deputies are deliberating some of the amended changes to that process, and we'll be hearing what's going on at the Great Hall of People in just a moment.
Yes, indeed. And going back to reforms on state institutions, Mr. Xia, what would you say are the focuses of this year's plan?
Well, actually, we have seen the 9 round of the reforms of the institution, especially the institution reform in terms of the national level, the organ. Basically, we had a very clear logic behind these rounds of reform. That is that's the kind of consolidation of the central authority, because we have China is a very big country. It has a wide in terms of its size and the complexity, in terms of its domestic structure and the different conditions in different regions. So basically, that means China, the central government or the central authority in China needs to have a very strong say in terms of the strategic plan, in terms of so what kind of schedule should be implemented in terms of a specific, let's say, industry or program. So that's the kind of characteristics of centralizing, the feature of this decision making and also the institutional reform. So this year, the feature got strengthened and got re-emphasized in the case of the restructure of the Ministry of Science and Technology, and also the kind of the forming of a new administration.
Having said that, gentlemen, let's get this from the ongoing third plenary meeting of this year's NPC, and this just came in. NPC deputies have approved the draft decision on the reform plan of state council institutions. So, Professor, it looks like the plan has just passed. Do carry on with your analysis on the focuses.
Right, yeah, because this is a kind of in accordance with the spirit or the principle set by the 20th National Congress of the party last year. So basically, we can see a very clear logic behind the reform. That is the consolidation or the strengthening of the central authority in decision making, and especially in some kind of a strategic field or related to national strategy. That's important, right?
Mm-hmm. So what about the specific fields you were earlier talking about?
Oh yes, the first case is the Ministry of Science and Technology. The second case is the national data management, or the national administration of data management. This kind of, because each and every people got very connected with each other in this kind of virtual and the real world. We are very concerned about whether our data could be protected or could be, let's say, guaranteed in the future. So this national administration of data management is a very strong, let's say, step to protect the national, the personal data, and also it's a very strong signal to show to the world that China is going to do everything to protect its social security and the national security.
Yeah, well, actually, the reform plan was approved at last October's Party Congress, and this is perhaps the biggest restructuring since 2018. That round of reform has affected about 1.8 million staff, and of course, this round of reform will be far-reaching and really has a deep influence on the country's development in the future. So, Professor Wang, I'd like to ask you this: how will this round of reform be different from the previous rounds, and how does it reflect the changing realities of China's development?
Yeah, like you said, there is always continuity in terms of why we needed to change the institutions, and the major reason of the changes in the past 8 rounds was that the Chinese economic and social development was going so fast, and the changing environment globally also pushes pressure on domestic institutional reform. So we had to make a regularly review of our institutional setting to make sure that our ministries are best set up to make the best public policies catering to the Chinese domestic demands in national development. So speaking of the last round of administrative reform, it was mostly catering to a changing reality where China was facing emergency management issues, both domestically, and China is reaching over to the other parts of the world and help other countries with their rescue efforts. So in 2018, we established the National Administration of Emergency Management, which incorporated the functions of previously held by several other ministries. We also set up a National Administration of International Cooperation, which was meant to foster and promote China's foreign aid. So you see, these were all catering to an increasing demand for Chinese national
going with the
development.
trend of the time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, now let's look at some specifics of this plan. Here's CGTN reporter Sun Ye to elaborate on the plan's implementation and how those areas would change.
All for the goal of optimizing institutions, and it starts with the Ministry of Science and Technology. The plan says this ministry would restructure to better allocate resources for key technologies and self-reliance in science and technology. And its way of working would rely even more on the new system of mobilizing the nation for technological breakthroughs. And the plan says China will set up a new National Financial Regulatory Administration. It incorporates functions for the existing China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission and takes on some functions from the PBOC and Securities Regulatory Commission. The local financial regulatory mechanism would also deepen. Meanwhile, the Securities Regulatory Agency would become a government agency rather than a public institution, and it will be directly underneath the State Council. Now, the plan we talked about also says China would establish a national data bureau. This new bureau would be administered by the National Development and Reform Commission, and it will be responsible for the use of data resources, the building of a digital China, digital economy, and a digital society. There are also other proposed improvements for rural areas, intellectual property rights, for staff management, and for the country's elderly care work mechanism, which comes as China enters an aging society.
Yeah, so gentlemen, let's continue our discussion on institutional reform. We understand that a lot of emphasis is put on science and technological innovation, and this round, the Science and Technology Ministry will be restructured to be able to channel more resources to achieve scientific breakthrough. Why is innovation being elevated to such a high level, Professor?
Well, obviously, China is facing a international challenge in terms of how technology is going to be, it has already been used as a weapon by some of the countries in the world, and China needs to make sure that our national security is well guaranteed, and science and technology will be the top priority to ensure that national security is well guaranteed. At the same time, China has already invested very heavily in science and research and development. For example, last year, the percentage of GDP for R&D reached over 2.5% of the GDP, which was a significant increase from 10 years ago. So that was saying that we paid a lot of attention to R&D and science and technology development. And now, speaking of the importance of data, and in fact, we passed a couple of laws already. In 2016, we passed the cybersecurity law, and in 2021, we passed the National Data Security Law. But in the past, we paid more attention to the security perspective of data, whereas now we're paying more attention to data as a productive factor. We are all aware that the major productive factors are land, labor, and capital. But now in the 21st century, in the current era, and in the era that's to come, data has become a new productive factor. So data is like the new oil or new gold in today's world. And it's also about national security. So it makes sense that the Chinese institutional reform takes care of the issue of data management, and it also going to cater to a problem or issues that we are facing at the local governments. For example, The Chinese administrative system is such that we have different vertical lines coming from the central government all the way down to the grassroots level. For example, we have Ministry of Civil Affairs that has local branches. We have Ministry of Public Security that has local branches. All of the ministries have their own data system. And in the past, there was a gap in terms of bridging the data systems across ministries. And now, in some of the local governments, they already experimented of incorporating the data systems across these administrative vertical lines. So now it's time for the national government to have a centralized authority that manages all the data systems from top to down and across all the administrative vertical lines. So in the end, the national government is more able to coordinate the data management and take better advantage of the data and its value.
There's a lot of sensitivity surrounding the collection and management of data, and so that's why the central government is placing an ever more attention on this issue.
Yes, and what about the financial sector, Professor Xia? We notice that it is more centralized, as that's the word used by you, on financial regulation all around the country. What would you say is the priority here? Is it stability? Because we noticed that since last year's 20th CPC National Congress report to this year's government work report, financial stability has been emphasized so many times.
Yes, right. Actually, the regulation of financial governing ability, actually, it is a common, let's say, operation by a lot of countries, especially in those kind of developed industrialized countries. Even if they don't have or they are not setting up this kind of the national level regulatory administration, they still got some law-based governance in terms of this financial, working people or the staff working in the financial field. They should obey the law, and they should, do everything to obey the law, and they couldn't do, at their discretion, because financial ability or financial field is key to a country's kind of economic security, right? Because we are looking at the different, or we are looking at a huge amount of the flow of money, a flow of capital, and this kind of capital, well, sometimes it can help a country to boom the economy. Sometimes it will bring some kind of negative impact. So the restructure or the reform of the financial institution in China, and also the centralizing of the national, financial governing capability, it is the key operation to protect China's security in this field, in order to to bring more and let's say a positive impact to the national economy rather than the negative one. So I think that is why the repeated highlight of this financial centralizing authority. Right.
Well, gentlemen, let's get more updates on the agenda of the third plenary meeting. Friday morning is the election of China's leadership, including the president, the vice president, the chairperson of the Central Military Commission, and the leaders of the 14th NPC Standing Committee. Here's how it will take place.
Chinese citizens who have the right to vote, stand for election, and have reached the age of 45 are all eligible for election as the country's president. Normally, one candidate for the presidency is nominated by the Presidium of the NPC, after consultation among the various delegations. This candidate must win a majority vote of all NPC deputies to be officially elected. The elections of Vice President, Chairman of the Central Military Commission, President of the Supreme People's Court, the Procurator General, Director of National Supervisory Commission, as well as members of the NPC Standing Committee all follow this same process. Here's what happens next. The President nominates the Premier of the State Council. Then the Premier nominates the Vice Premiers, State Councillors, Ministers, and so on.
So, gentlemen, let's talk about this process. Professor Xia, tell us more about the constitutional stipulation on this crucial process.
In one of the kind of important mission of the National People's Congress is to elect the national leaders of our country, not only in the executive branch, but also in the legislative branch and in the military administration branch. So the election happens, in the first place, the presidium, this kind of presidium, will nominate a candidate for the National People's Congress to vote. And these 2,977 deputies will vote. Each person have one vote, whether it kind kind of approve or disapprove of these candidates. And then this candidate becomes, the president, and it will, the president will also nominate a candidate for vice president and also the candidate for the chairman of the Central Military Commission. So after all these kind of the national level leaders got decided, the president will nominate the candidate of the premier, and then this 2,977 deputies will approve this premiership, and then the premier will nominate the vice premier and member of the state council and ministers and so on and so forth. So this is a kind of procedure. It's not like the 2,900 people decide each and every one. It's just like one nominate the other one and one proof, and then the one nominate the other one. So it is a kind of procedure. So this is called the continuity or the legal procedure of the constitutional, authority.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And today's agenda is being closely watched by journalists and analysts, both home and abroad, because they could have the results here could have a very far-reaching impact on the international community and China's relations with the rest of the world. China's election process is very different from the Western style. To what extent do you think it reflects the Chinese characteristics of building a socialist modern country?
Right, and like you said, in your words, China is aiming, and China is a socialist country, is aiming to become a socialist, modern, strong nation. So socialism is written in the Chinese constitution, and Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, and Deng Xiaoping theory represents, and scientific outlook, and also the socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era have all been written in the Chinese constitution, which reflect the very nature of the Chinese political system, which is very different from the Western political system, which has developed based on their historical experience. But Chinese political system, which was established in 1949, was based upon the Chinese historical experience of pursuing various ideologies, various possibilities of political system, but at the end of which we found that it would only make sense that the current system would best fit the Chinese historical, cultural, and socioeconomic conditions. Nonetheless, we have been trying to make changes and updates based upon our socioeconomic change, which is happening really, really fast. So, for example, in 1993, the Chinese constitution was amended to incorporate the tenet that Chinese political system is a socialist country with Chinese characteristics, and socialist legality was also written into the Chinese constitution, all reflecting the fact that yes, we stick to our conventional ideologies and political systems, but at the same time, we are not afraid, we're not hesitant to make updates based upon what has been going on with our economy and with our society.
Right, gentlemen, let's get more updates. And we've just learned that the deputies have approved a draft method on election and appointment for the first session of the 14th National People's Congress. The lawmakers will adhere to this method in electing the chairman of the 14th NPC Standing Committee, China's president and vice president. Senior officials are also expected to be chosen. So, Professor Wang, let's get more from just the latest updates. Tell us more about the procedure of NPC deputies electing the NPC Standing Committee. What's the difference between the Standing Committee and the NPC itself as an institution?
That's an interesting question, because usually people understand the National People's Congress better because the two sessions, nearly 3,000 deputies from all over China would come to Beijing together to have the national discussion on the most important things and policies and stuff. What's probably less being aware by the international viewers is that on the daily basis, it is the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress that constitutes about 160 members who took care of the regular operation on a daily basis. So this is the time, every 5 years, the national deputies would elect the Standing Committee members, and the Standing Committee also includes a secretariat, which is headed by the Secretary General, And also the standing committee would be chaired by a chairman and a number of vice chairmen. So all these positions, chairman, vice chairman, secretary general, and the standing committee members will be elected by the nearly 3,000 people's deputies. So that's what's going to happen today and in the next few days.
And all those subcommittees in the standing committee of the NPC, right, Professor Xiang?
Right, yes. And I would like to also add some kind of discussion about the standing committee, echoing Professor Wang. Well, by referring standing committee, we actually mean that these 160 members of the standing committee, they are full-time lawmakers. But these 2,977 deputies, they serve as part-time lawmaker. For example,
it's more of a duty, right?
Yes, it's more of the duty, and they come here in Beijing, each and every year in the early of the March, talking about the national issue. Sometimes they still have their own job. For example, one of the deputies is the chancellor of our university. So
you mean University of China?
Right,
okay.
yes. So after this session, well, he will go back to the university campus, serving still as his daily job is the chancellor of the university, right? But he can be summoned to this next session of the NPC is kind of a National Assembly. However, between this year's National Assembly, Congress session and the next year's session, and within this year, well, who will be taking care of or in charge of this kind of lawmaking and the supervision and the decision making and even some kind of the ministry level members kind of approving or disapproving, that's the standing committee member. And also, like you just mentioned, there are a few subcommittees. This kind of subcommittees called special subcommittees under the standing committee of the NPC. They are in charge of the special lawmaking and the reviewing of the draft and even to propose some kind of a new law draft to the next session of the National People's Congress. So their job is to making the law, to approving some kind of the decision, and even to supervising the executive and administration in the national level and the provincial level. So they have a lot of jobs, and they are going to hold meetings and conferences in each and every month. So that's the standing committee's job.
Yeah, the standing committee meets more frequently when the NPC plenary session is not in session.
Yeah, it maintains the daily operation of the institution. Yes. And this just came in. The deputies have just approved a draft name list of scrutineers, including the chief scrutineers for elections coming up at the first session of the 14th National People's Congress. You're watching a special coverage on CGTN on China's annual political season. Stay with us.
Construction machinery is an industry for the benefit of mankind. Its core competitiveness is key technological innovations. In the past 5 years, we have developed the world's largest tower crane, hydraulic excavator, and a series of domestic-made equipment. Innovation is important for the country's self-reliance and self-improvement in science and technology.
Over the past 10 years, we launched the Liaoning, carried fighter jets on board, and embarked on long-distance deployment. The Liaoning is painting the magnificent trajectory of a great nation. Where our national interest is where our ship sails.
Guided by General Secretary Xi Jinping, we have shifted from relying on the land to nourishing it, and we have changed our development plan. We believe clear waters and lush mountains are valuable assets. It will guide rural vitalization and bring greater glory.
The concept of ecological civilization is now deeply rooted in people's hearts, and protecting the environment has become a national consensus. We will achieve our goal. The wild pandas will live a better life on our land.
You're watching CGTN. This is our special coverage on China's annual political season, the 2 sessions. China has made milestone achievements in socio-economic development in the past decade. The 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, which was held in October last year, has unveiled its blueprint for building a modern socialist country in all respects for the next 5 years and beyond.
That's right, and now for a deeper look at China's efforts in this, let's hear from our reporters Wu Bin in Shanghai and Omar Khan in Guangzhou. So why don't we begin with you, Wu Bin? So as a financial hub, Shanghai has been a front runner in implementing opening up policies, and it's taken on a new mission in this new era. What has the city achieved in expanding high-level opening up?
Mamang, I'm now at the world's largest deep-water port, Yangshan Port, also part of the port of Shanghai. Some say that this place is a mirror of China's opening up. The port was established in the early 2000s after China joined the WTO. And with this deep-water port, Shanghai soon became one of the most important shipping hubs in the world. The Shanghai port has ranked top in the world for 13 consecutive years in terms of its global container throughput. And now, let's take a closer look at the Yangshan port over there. It's the world's busiest container port. Almost half of the containers entering in and out of Shanghai are transported here. And it's very efficient because what we are seeing right now is also the world's largest automated container terminal. Nowadays, almost 20,000 container trucks will be here transporting containers. It'll only take them about 1 hour to go to downtown Shanghai. And then the containers will be further transported to every place in China, given Shanghai's strategic role in the Yangtze River economic belt and also its highly developed traffic network. As part of the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, a series of measures have been taken at this place to further open up. For example, it is at this port where a foreign-flagged vessel carried out cargo relays for the first time in May 2022, further opening China's shipping sector. And it is also in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone where the negative list management system was first introduced in 2013, 10 years ago. And the list keeps shortening over the years from 190 entries to just 27 entries in its latest version. And now, with China shifting its focus to high-quality development, the opening up is also aiming at a higher level, with more than just opening more sectors, but also touching the essence of rules, regulations, management, and standards. And this year also marks the 10th anniversary of the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, and we're also looking forward to the Free Trade Zone's new trials in this aspect, Mama.
All right, thanks so much, Ubin, for that. And certainly this is a fine example of how China is trying to pursue high-quality development and opening up wider to the outside world.
Indeed, the world's largest automated port. Quite impressive. Now let's cross live to our reporter Omar Han in China's southern manufacturing powerhouse of Guangzhou. Omar, how's the city speeding up industrial modernization?
Well, Pandang, I don't think there's any better example to show you industrial upgrading than actually being here in a major plant, in a major automated factory. I'm going to be showing you some of the action taking place here. I'm here at GAC, that's Guangzhou Automobile Group, based in South China, one of the largest auto manufacturers, not only in the province of Guangdong, but of course nationwide. We're going to take a walk through this assembly line and let's showcase some of those advances being made in industrial upgrading. Now, just a few details on what's happening at this assembly line. It's a focus on windshield manufacturing and assembly. So the front and back of the vehicle, those are all being monitored and assembled here. The standout point, however, is that it's the first unattended automatic glass assembly technology in the industry and the most advanced technology for GAC here in China. You can see these intelligent tractors, these robotic arms, just as my cameraman pans through this portion of the assembly line. A lot of these robots programmed through AI. You have advanced sort of image technology, recognition lasers. You can see these windshields being placed in these robot arms, working all in sort of synchronization. At the top there, we still haven't got a piece reaching there. That's a gluing station that utilizes laser technology, precision sort of accuracy to place everything according to the vehicle behind that we're eventually going to see as these robots get through their work. Now, you mentioned high quality development. That's a buzzword. That's a keyword that we've heard throughout the last couple of months. You look at Guangdong, just after the Chinese New Year, economic planners in the province of Guangdong planning over 1,500 key provincial projects throughout 2023. Those are going to total over 8.4 trillion RMB with a focus on an abundance of different sectors, 20 strategic industries, 8 industrial clusters. That includes green petrochemicals, advanced materials, modern agriculture, and of course the auto industry, something we're seeing here at GAC. And there's been a recognition of the changes happening to the economy here in Guangdong. Traditionally all about manufacturing, cheap labor, cheap products, import, export. But clearly that's changing, as you can see the robots sort of dancing in the background there, showcasing some of the advances being made here. Think of the auto industry decades ago, required so much manpower, hands on deck. Now everything is automated. Now, let's look at that work report released on March 5th after 2 sessions, a major focus on accelerating the modernization of the industrial system. Another example is what we're seeing here in this assembly plant. Also, redoubling of efforts to explore and develop important energy and mineral resources. Perhaps a hint to chip development used in a lot of the products, including vehicles, a lot of those products we use every day. And of course, NEVs, new energy vehicles. You had the Guangzhou Auto Exhibition not too long ago. I spoke with GAC there alongside other companies, all of them focusing on lithium batteries, green technology. That is sort of the trend we're seeing going forward. And just to wrap up, I spoke with an economist not too long ago about the future trend, especially here we're seeing in Guangdong. The focus is that, look, it's not going to be about low-end manufacturing anymore. China is moving up the value chain. Things are, of course, getting more expensive, but the quality, the value, that's all going up. And that is perhaps captured in what we see here in South China. All the entrepreneurs, all the innovators, those big tech companies should define the future of South China. Mang Mang, Pandang.
Really an eye-opener. Thank you very much. Our reporters Omar Han in Guangzhou and Wu Bing in Shanghai.
So AI busy at work, and then there's very impressive precision machinery and state-of-the-art deep water port. And we're going to move now to the countryside. China's rural population have seen major changes in their lives over the past decade, with China having accomplished its goal of eradicating extreme poverty by the end of 2020. Per capita disposable income of rural residents reached over 20,000 yuan last year, more than double compared to 1 decade ago. And in southwest China's Sichuan province, geographical indication or GI certified free-range chicken farming is helping villagers increase their income. Guo Tianqi has the story.
Glossy feathers, strong, healthy bodies. The price of these free-range GI chickens can be 2 or 3 times higher than standard chickens. They have been bred for more than 2,000 years in Luzhou's Naxi district.
For chickens in the forest, their living space must be more than 10 square meters on average, and they'll search for food in the mountains during the daytime and return to rest in this bamboo shelter at night.
This previously poverty-stricken mountainous village embraced a new idea to raise these chickens under a canopy of fruit trees. The idea from a local official has helped move more than 300 households out of poverty. The annual output from the village now exceeds $1.5 million.
The producers' cooperative have helped us with technology, providing baby chicken, and they help us sell them.
To ensure quality, the producers' cooperative feed the chicken indoors for about a month before releasing them into the mountains. This program is supported by the local government, which also supervises the quality of GI products.
We carry regular quality tests on the owner's products. Once a product is found to be substandard, the company will be immediately disqualified from using its GI mark.
The local government also helps villagers use smart agriculture. By scanning the QR code on the package, consumer can see how long the chickens have been growing, what kind of feed and medicine they have consumed. These GI chicken producers were able to take part in the first Global GI Products Expo. The villagers were able to showcase their chickens alongside more than 1,000 other GI products from 20 countries and regions. Guo Tianqi, CGTN, Luzhou, Sichuan Province.
So modernization in the farming sector in China's vast rural areas. So China has really made remarkable achievements in eradicating extreme poverty in the countryside over the past decade, and now it's trying to improve people's well-being and living standards in the vast countryside. And it has built the world's largest education, social security, as well as healthcare systems. How big of a change, Professor Xia, are you seeing in the countryside in people's living standards?
Well, just now you mentioned about the poverty eradication or the poverty alleviation. I think the achievement of the poverty alleviation is really remarkable because we can see the data. After the last 10 years or during the last 10 years, we have been alleviated almost 100 million Chinese people out of the poverty, out of the absolute poverty. Well, that means 100 million people, and during this last 10 years, which means that each and every year we have more than 10 million Chinese people got alleviated from the absolute poverty. Well, 10 million people is small and medium size of population or small and medium size of country in the European Union, right? So we are actually doing a very remarkable job, and this is not by 1 year or 2 years, it is last for 10 years, so it is remarkable. And also after the poverty eradication, alleviation, the next job is to re-strengthen or to to do more job to make the rural the rural area get more potential and get more resources to have their modernized rural kind of agriculture rather than to just doing the traditional planting, traditional growing. So it is a Chinese version of modernization in rural side, and that is the balance of China's rural area and urban area, and it is also the key feature to the Chinese promise to the modernization. I think that achievement is really remarkable.
Rural revitalization, you mean? So Professor Wang, of course it's quite important to focus on the rural side, but also the rural-urban gap. What are the methods raised by, of course, last year's CPC National Congress and this year's 2 sessions to deal with this?
Well, I wanted to echo Professor Xia's point that it was a remarkable achievement to eradicate absolute poverty by 2021. But there are still issues to be concerned. We're concerned that some of the people who just got out of poverty may slide back to poverty again, if there was no further subsidy or if there was no further job opportunity.
And even natural disasters.
Exactly.
Or illness as well.
Or, all kinds of factors could fall back on many of the vulnerable group of the population. So that means that the government and the private sector and everybody in the country needed to work harder to make a bigger cake, basically. Our economy needs to be stronger to create more job opportunities, not just in urban cities, but also in the second, third, fourth tier cities and towns, so that the rural population may every day, they would have a new opportunity to be faced with, so that they can find jobs. They don't have to travel so far, to Beijing, Shanghai, and leaving their kids behind, but they could also find jobs, decent jobs in their nearby towns. So that would be one measure, that's been discussed a lot to narrow the gap between the urban and the rural area. I think in comparison to many other governments, you have many governments in the world who so believed in the trickle-down economics, where you just create opportunities for the rich. Logically, the rich people would generate job opportunities to the poorer people, but that's not going to happen in the 21st century because now we're in the globalized world and division of labor is so diversified, and so not everybody can take advantage of this globalization process, which means that the government needs to do a better job and a bigger job in helping the vulnerable groups to gain advantage of the opportunities through a provision of social services and a better welfare system. So like you just mentioned, China has been doing very great in terms of establishing the largest social welfare system, the healthcare system. But viewers from the international community may not be aware that just 20 years ago we didn't even have a sound social welfare system, a social safety net. We established this basically from scratch. So that means it was a very daunting job to pull the resources from the national community, and the government needs to be very careful in calculating how taxes should be collected. On the one hand, but not so much taxes are collected so that there's no incentive for businesses and for individuals. So, in the end, we need to create a social safety net that caters to the needs of everybody in the country, but especially the vulnerable groups. And so now we're talking about a a well-developed social safety net system, so that the large majority of the Chinese population now are in the social medical insurance system, are in the pension scheme, and in the unemployment scheme. So all of these schemes are helping people all over China to live a better life.
And we just signed those previous reports. Modernization is embedded in every aspect of China's development. For example, modernization in the manufacturing sector, modernization in infrastructure, and as well as modernization in people's way of lives. Gone are the days when farmers grow their crops based on individual experiences. There's modern technology support behind all these farming activities. And then China has been pursuing this path to modernization according to its very unique national conditions. But the narrative of modernization is interpreted differently by the West. So Professor Xia, how would you compare the very different conception of modernization?
Well, first we need to be clear that modernization does not equal to westernization in terms of each and every, let's say, criterion. Modernization actually is a process, it's a changing process in which science and technology will bring impact to a society in each and every aspect, and also in people's kind of opinion, in people's kind of thinking or way of thinking. So the path to modernization, I would like to say that one of the key features of the Chinese path to modernization is the balancing between the urban area and rural area, balancing between the material production and even the spiritual development, and balancing between the people's improvement of people's living condition, working condition, and the preserve of the natural environment. So that is important, because I always wonder what is the real difference between China's modernization and Western modernization. That is Chinese people always becomes cautious in making policies, in making, let's say, future plans. They are not only thinking about present time, they are thinking about the future. So they try to balance the present time and the future. So that is why we call Chinese path to modernization is a contribution to the human civilization.
Yeah, and we're going to continue our discussion in just a moment. Thank you for that. You're watching our special coverage of the third plenary meeting of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress. Stay with us.
I try to serve the public by doing specific things for them. I want them to feel that the party is truly committed to serving the people heart and soul. I think this shows that the spirit of the 20th Communist Party of China National Congress is bearing fruit at the grassroots level.
After doing research for over 30 years, I have come to realize two things. First, we cannot buy core technologies from anywhere. We're on our own to achieve technological breakthroughs and build up our national strength. Second, Chinese people are one of the most capable and aspiring. We can break any stranglehold aimed at containing China's development.
In 2013, when we landed the Chang'e 3 probe successfully on the moon, we thought the moon is near and Mars is far away. When the Tianwen-1 probe touched down on Mars in 2021, we brought Mars closer to us, though we're still far from our dreams. In the future, we'll continue to advance into the universe and make greater contributions to build China into a powerhouse of space technologies.
The third plenary meeting of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress is underway at the Great Hall of the People.
The lawmakers will elect the President and the Vice President of the People's Republic of China, the Chairperson of the Central Military Commission of China, as well as a Chairperson, Vice Chairpersons, and Secretary General of the 14th NPC Standing Committee. And we'll keep you updated on the process.
Yes, of course. And getting the latest fresh out of the Great Hall of the People is my colleague Tian Wei. She's been following the development there very closely. Tian Wei?
Mang, yes, indeed. This morning, the third plenary meeting of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress is now still proceeding in the Great Hall of the People right behind me. I was here before 9 a.m. The meeting began. I met some of the delegates of the National People's Congress. They were extremely excited about the morning agenda they are having today. As all of you may know, as announced by our anchors already, this morning 7 important tasks on the agenda. It is about the approval of the State Council Institutional Reform Plan, approve of the list of co-scrutineers and scrutineers, approve of the measures for election and appointments, and also to elect the President of the People's Republic of China, the chairperson of the Central Military Commission, the chairperson, vice chairperson, and also Secretary General of the National People's Congress Standing Committee, and the election of the Vice President of the People's Republic of China. And among all of these, of course, there are some that are really needing more explanation. For example, the State Council institutional reform. But before I go there, I would like to brief you a little bit about what is going on right now in the Great Hall of People. Right before 9 a.m., the delegates went into the Great Hall of the People meeting hall. Some public announcement made by the staff of the Great Hall of the People already suggesting to people how to use the voting machine efficiently. And earlier, just a few minutes earlier, we also understand the staff are briefing the deputies of the National People's Congress again about how to use the voting machines so that everybody would be able to use them efficiently. Now, among all of the things that are on the agenda this morning, State Council institutional reform is one that attracts so much attention and also needs a lot of detailed explanation. As being delivered in the draft plan on March the 7th, several important areas considering the financial sector, the science and technology, and other areas. One is about the science and technology, the restructuring of the Ministry of Science and Technology and the establishment of the Science and Technology Commission under the direct guidance of the CPC Central Committee, and also about the establishment of the National Financial Regulatory Management Administration under the State Council. Meanwhile, there's also the establishment of the National Data Bureau, the increased mechanism of how to deal with the ever-increasing aging population, the measures to try to better protect the intellectual property rights, and also the maximization of the policies and also roles of the Ministry of Agriculture for rural revitalization. All of these are on the agenda. As all of you may know, the institutional reform plan will be put out every few years in China's political season, sometimes more frequent, 1 or 2 years, sometimes more with a bigger frequency, a larger frequency, for example, 5 years. And certainly this is one of those very important years. For those who are going to vote today and also exercise their responsibility, the National People's Congress deputies, they are about 3,000 strong. They're coming from different walks of life and also from different parts of China. 15% are ethnic minorities and about 26% women. Meanwhile, we also know that with this makeup of the National People's Congress deputies, we are having them over the years trying to understand and also submit issues related to questions and challenges that people feel in their daily lives and also in the governance to the CPC commissions and also to the State Council. Meanwhile, these people's deputies are also going to perform their responsibilities at giving policies, proposals as well. So you see, they are performing their responsibilities, and certainly today, this morning, especially at the session with such important tasks on their agenda, they are very excited about their mission. This is what China calls a people's democracy whole process. And also, of course, this is one that are unique to China. As you may know, China believes there's no democracy system that one size fits all. And we are going to see more important information coming out this morning from the Great Hall of the People, and certainly our live show. And me here standing right in front of the Great Hall of People are going to brief you about the latest. Back to you.
Yeah, we'll certainly keep checking with you for any latest development there. Thank you so much, Tianwei.
As our colleague Tianwei just mentioned, the third plenary meeting of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress is underway. In the meeting, NPC deputies will elect the President and Vice President of the People's Republic of China, the chairperson of the country's Central Military Commission, as well as chairperson, vice chairpersons, and Secretary General of the 14th NPC Standing Committee.
And of course, one of the key items under deliberation through this year's NPC session is the draft amendment to the legislation law, which stipulates the process of creating national laws, government regulations, and local laws in this country. And let's now take a look at some of its highlights.
One of the major changes is its emphasis on whole process people's democracy. National legislature said every link in the legislative process should reflect people's voices and reality at the grassroots level. To achieve this, the draft stipulates that local legislative outreach offices should be set up to solicit opinions from the grassroots and people from all walks of life. It also proposes to systemize the protection of human rights in legislative work. Meanwhile, the draft includes detailed requirements for constitutional review and the recording and reviewing of legislative and normative documents. It also introduces an emergency lawmaking procedure for the NPC Standing Committee, where a bill may be put to vote after a single deliberation at the Standing Committee. And the draft adds provisions on regional coordination on legislation, which had already been adopted in recent years by local governments for ecological conservation.
And now let's get back to our guests. I want to get your thoughts on these gentlemen. So this draft amendment to the legislation law was made 8 years after the law was first amended in 2015. What are some of the highlights we're expecting to see, and how does it reflect the most pressing issues in China's legislation process? Professor Wang.
Well, first of all, I think we need to understand that the legislation law is one of the most important laws in the Chinese legal system because it sets the infrastructure for other laws. For example, the legislation law makes sure that all other laws would have to be compliant with the national constitution. And the legislation law also sets the procedures of how every laws have to be made to be passed. And it also stipulates the division of labor, or the division of responsibilities of legislation between the central and local governments. So all in all, the legislation law is like a semi-constitution. It really helps all the legislation processes in China to be compliant with the national constitution. For example, this to-be-revised draft of the legislation law is going to further emphasize on the exempt constitutional review, which means that any laws to be passed by the National People's Congress or the local legislatures would have to be first reviewed by the National People's Congress Constitutional Law Committee to make sure that it is compliant with the national constitution. It also makes sure that all the local legislations would have to be first reviewed by the National People's Congress Constitutional Law Committee to make sure that they're also complying with the national policies with the overall development of China. So the revision of the legislation law really is to further streamline the legislation process. And in this process, and I think the episode was talking about the whole process democracy. I think I'd like to highlight the point that the legislative process, which also is stipulated by the legislation law, is emphasizing a lot on the public participation. For example, if you look at the legislation process of a particular law, usually it goes around 4, 5, even 6 rounds of drafts. And it took 2 to 3 readings by the National People's Congress Standing Committee and also by the National People's Congress delegates before it goes out to be passed. But in this process, at every round of the reading and the draft, it needs to go public. So there is a public commenting process right now, which allows the general public to view the drafts of particular laws that are concerning their daily interests so that they can make feedback to the legislators and the drafters. And with e-governance and digital revolution, now we're talking about citizens being able to participate in public commenting of the legislative processes through the internet or through other ways. So these new digitalized processes also facilitate the participation by the general public. So that really reflects the whole process democracy, where public participation is now being made available in more and more processes of national legislation and national policymaking.
Professor, since you mentioned it, we noticed that there's also been physical innovation in this process. You just mentioned the soliciting opinions, getting public reactions through all the readings and amending process. That's the legislative work outreach offices, right, Professor Xia, going down to the very grassroots level of this country, and I believe there are more than 1,000 of them now. How does this mechanism work?
Well, I agree with Professor Wang's opinion about the feature of the legislation law is more about the release or the showing the signal about the whole process, people's democracy. Actually, when we review the entire lawmaking process in China, especially since the reform period, we actually have a very kind of a clear sense that who was or who were the initiator of each and every draft. Actually, they were most of the initiators. They were the executives. They were the ministers of the officials of ministries, and even some kind of a strong business, rather than the real people, rather than the people from the grassroots. So that is why this kind of outreach contact offices becomes more and more important in the future lawmaking process, because people's kind of voice, people's kind of real opinion, and people's suggestion should also be incorporated into the lawmaking process. We are saying that we should build a law-based government, right? Law-based government. Why wouldn't we say law-based legislation, law-based lawmaking process? So this is also equally important in terms of lawmaking. So, well, I would like to say that among these 2,977 deputies, they are not all law school students, right? They are not all law school graduates. So they also need to learn the methodologies about how to make law. So this legislation law just brings or just offers the framework about the methodology in terms of how to make law. In which way should we make the law, and toward which direction should we offer a law that could incorporate the grassroots people's opinion into the process. So this is the feature of the whole process, people's democracy. Yeah.
And over the past decade, a series of legal reforms have taken place in China's the legal sector. For example, we saw the anti-monopoly law, national security law, as well as the groundbreaking civil code. Right. How would you interpret the amendment of these laws and the creation of these laws from the legislation process?
Well, the passing or the making of these laws actually is the signal of China is now following the people-oriented governance, right? Try to get more of the opinion of the grassroots people, what the people really need, what the people really want in terms of how should the government or how should the society should be governed, how should the society should be managed. So this voice, these opinions actually are really about the grassroots society rather than some of the interest groups or the strong business. So it is the essence of Chinese socialism, or the socialism with Chinese characteristics, because should be focusing on people's opinion, should be, let's say, incorporating people's opinion into the the process, not only in the lawmaking process, but also the policy making, policy implementation, even the official, the supervision of the official process. So that's also kind of the achievement we have been seeing in the last 10 years in this lawmaking process. Right.
So we've mentioned quite some specific laws, and looking at the big picture, China has established this socialist legal system consisting of all those laws we mentioned and many more. But one in common for all those laws is that they must all be constitutional. So Professor Wang, how important is constitutional review stipulated in the legislation law?
It is extremely important because national constitution is the foundation of any country. National constitution stipulates who we are, where we have been from, and where we are heading to. So the constitution is the foundation of every laws and every public policies and the national development. And what makes Chinese political system different from many other countries is that the constitutional review function is located at the National People's Congress, which makes sense because all the legislatures legislations are passed by the National People's Congress. So the National People's Congress Constitution and Law Committee performs this function of reviewing all the to-be-passed legislations to make sure that they're not against the Constitution and they're being compliant with the foundation's principles and ideas embedded in the Constitution, not only at the national level, but also at the local level. So National People's Congress, Constitution and Law Committee, we talk about the subcommittees at the Standing Committee on NPC, and this is one of the most significant subcommittees, which reviews all the legislations to make sure that Constitution is well guaranteed.
And we are seeing changes in continuity, professors. China has always been aiming to reflect the whole process, people's democracy in its legislation process, and then hopefully this will be further strengthened in the future legislation process. To pick up where you just left, whole process, people's democracy in the legislation process, in the future, how will it really have a lasting impact on the country's legal development?
Right. Yeah, this is very interesting because when we talk about, in the university, scholars talking about lawmaking, talking about political institution, political structure, they always focus on one particular aspect of the political process. That is the election. That is to elect the lawmakers, and then the people just will take a rest and then make all the kind of special lawmakers to make the laws and to make the decisions and to make the kind of supervision. But that is not the the essence of the democracy, because democracy means that people's rule, or rule by the people, rule of the people. So in China, the whole process, people's democracy, get people involved into the different aspects of political activity, political process, rather than only election. So it also includes people into the process of decision making, and also the decision consultation, and also the policy deliberation, and even the political supervision. So in this the whole process, while people can be educated and taught and trained in terms of how politics should be run, how political activity should be operated, and even how law should be reviewed, how laws draft should be initiated, promoted, and even to reviewed. So that's why we are saying that politics is ever-changing activity. Politics is not static, and even laws are not static. The laws are ever-changing. So we should adjust the law, and we should make the law adjust to the social development. So in this kind of meaning, we are talking about China's democracy is a whole process, democracy, people's democracy.
Indeed, legislation is just one of the segments in this whole process. Professor Wang, what about the supervision in this process?
Well, the supervision, we're talking about institution reform. Actually, in 2017 and 18, we also performed a institution reform. And we established a National Supervision Committee, which is also integrated with the party counterpart that also does the inspection and discipline work for the party members and cadres. And National Supervision Commission is the most important organ in the national government that performs the functions of supervising government officials, both at the national and local levels, and holding them accountable, and also make sure that whenever any policy making process is happening or legislation policy is happening, they are performed in a procedural way that goes along with the national laws. But most importantly, there shouldn't be any irregular activity to happen within this process. So we just watched that episode talking about election of the scrutineers, and in Western system they're called the poll watchers. And that's one of the ways of making sure that this entire election process is held legally and according to procedures and legitimately. And so all in all, I think the Supervision Commission and this function has been doing really great, especially in the past 10 years. If we look at the statistics showing that, big number of local and national cadres or involved in irregular behavior and have been disciplined. And there has been a new culture, I would say, in the bureaucracy that now is respecting power, not as something that can be corrupt, that can be abused, but rather as something that is a glorious, and having power is a glorious thing rather than a rent-seeking opportunity that you can get yourself pockets fat. No, but rather the power needs to be respected. So all of that has to be attributed to the great work of the National Supervision Commission and also the party counterpart of this function.
Right. Let me follow up on that. What about the supervision function of the National People's Congress as China's supreme organ in state power? For example, there are nearly 3,000 deputies attending this year's plenary session, and of course they will propose motions, and who will see them through?
Well, that's a good question, and we were just saying that the National People's Congress deputies are not career politicians. This is not their full-time job. They all have their own full-time jobs. This is not to say that on a daily basis, they're just off their duty. Whatever law is passed, they don't really care what's going on afterwards. No, actually, the National People's Congress deputies have this responsibility to carry out research trips and also meetings with officials at both national level, but of course more frequently with the local level officials, which have been organized by the national government, by the National People's Congress and local branches of the People's Congress system. So all these meetings, inspection trips and research trips have performed the function of helping the people's deputies know what's going on with the aftermath of those legislations, with the public policies. Are the government officials really following what they're supposed to be following? Are the policies being well implemented? So through these kind of activities, they're making sure that there's accountability. So talking about supervision, this is where it is. The National People's Deputies not only work every March in Beijing, they have a more regular operation as well.
Yeah, well, the National People's Congress has a broad representation comprising of people from different walks of life, and some are, for example, from the very grassroots, from the first, they're staying connected to their origin, for example, delivery workers and engineers, and even Generation Z has also a chance to shine at the NPC, expressing their different views of the country's development. So how does this broad representation help constitute the government's better understanding, Professor Xia, of the people's voices?
Well, this is a very interesting question. We always say that let the professional do their job, right? Sometimes we are arguing that the lawmaking and even the governing are kind of professional jobs. So we're just leaving the job for professionals, cadres, professional, let's say lawmakers to do the lawmaking, to do the governance. But actually, it's not like this, because when we go back to the real meaning of politics, when we go back to the real essence of politics, that means public affair. Public affair means each and every citizen of this society, each and every member of this community should have a say and could have a say in what direction, what characteristics this society should go. So that is why each and every people should have their representative into the National People's Congress. Even if we have 2,977 deputies, and even our annual session of this NPC only have less than 15 days, we still need to get as widely as possible our representation into the National People's Congress. Well, in the saying that we are doing real people's democracy, we are really touching. We are not saying that the Chinese democracy is 100% pure democracy, but we are saying that China is really realizing the real essence of democracy. That's people's rule. So that's the essence of politics, and that is why we have a wide representation in the NPC kind of deputies.
Well, gentlemen, let's get some global reactions on China's whole process of people's democracy. Martin Jacks is a British political analyst and former senior fellow at Cambridge University. He shares his thoughts on China's whole process, people's democracy.
China's actually got a very clear form of governance, which of course is rather different from what you find in Western countries. China's approach to democracy is not intermittent, but a continuing process, which is not just about selection and election of representatives, but also the importance of consultation and the involvement of expertise. Consultation with the people at all levels is a continuing process. It's not something that should happen from time to time. Likewise, the involvement of expertise, governance, is really critical. I mean, China has a long-established reputation for very efficient and competent governance, and that is partly the way it's succeeded in various institutions, for example, the 2 sessions now, in involving key experts in the field. And I think this is this kind of ongoing, comprehensive form of democracy defines and distinguishes China from the West.
In its work report, the Standing Committee of the 13th National People's Congress said that in the past 5 years it had improved the legal system to counter foreign sanctions, interference and a long-arm jurisdiction. And for more on that, let's talk to our studio guests. Professor Wang, tell us more about the role of China's top legislature in defending China's national security, national interests in a global perspective.
Well, in the global perspective, we're facing a challenging time and global environment where hegemonic powers in the world are trying to exert their power to the extent that they would not be afraid of interfering in internal affairs of other countries or trampling on the sovereignty of other nations. And so, you talk about the long-arm jurisdiction, which is famously or notoriously performed, practiced by some of the countries in the world. And that concern, what pretty much that means, long-arm jurisdiction means that a domestic law concerning domestic issues can have a global impact, can have impacts on somebody or some businesses, some individuals, thousands, tens of thousands of miles away from this country, even though these businesses and individuals have never had any business relations or legal affairs or relations with this particular government. Its own law can be practiced globally, pretty much.
And China is not going to do that, right?
We are always upholding the principle of non-interference in internal affairs of any country in the world, and we are always upholding this principle of sovereignty, which is being upheld by most of the countries in the world because it is the foundation of the United Nations. It was agreed upon by all the nations who participated in the United Nations system. And if sovereignty is not respected, then what's left to discuss for international politics and international affairs, international cooperation? That's why we need to make sure that sovereignty is well respected by every country in the international community. So on one hand, we're facing these challenges that some of the countries are practicing long-arm jurisdiction. On the other hand, while we uphold the principle of sovereignty and non-interference, we still need to protect ourselves, right? And so we have passed laws to make sure that the sanctions by other countries illegally would not be, followed by any companies or individuals who would like still to do business or have interactions with us, which makes sense, right? I mean, if a country exerts its domestic law in a foreign country, that foreign country gets to have some measures to protect itself. So the anti-foreign sanctions law is one such measure, and the Ministry of MOFCOM, Ministry of Commerce of China, also passed the unreliable entity list, which also lists the companies and individuals who the ministry believed that is not friendly or is trying to violate the interests of national security of China. So all these measures are meant to protect the Chinese national security, national economy on defensive terms.
Yeah, and we are seeing some, diverging interests and clashing of views in terms of the way that the government manages their countries, especially this increasing tension between China and some countries in the world. Where does China stand right now in terms of trying to bridge those gaps in their divergence of interests and to pursue this common development path, for example, building a community for a shared future for mankind?
Well, Chinese government has a very firm stance in this kind of a situation, opposing all the long-arm jurisdiction and opposing the so-called suppression and intervention of other countries' sovereignty. Well, actually, this is a common sense in the international relation and international order, right? It is order. It is a kind of common sense. And when I teach the modern Chinese diplomacy, this course in my class, I always ask the students to ask them to find or to search. What are the origins of modern international relation, modern international order? Well, they take all these kind of words for granted. They say that, okay, sovereignty, well, it's been a long time we have sovereignty. It's been a long time we have territory. It's been a long time we have international order and the diplomacy, this kind of, I'm saying that, no. I always tell them that if you go back to the 15th century or 14th century, there was no international order. There were international orders. One of the international order originated in 1648, has become the widespread global order. That is Westphalia Westphalia order originated in 1648. And actually, when we go back to the historical scene back then, their meaning, well, is to create an equal a community that each and every member of the community can enjoy the equal rights, equal status, and equal, law-based activity. Well, that's the real meaning. Well, China got dragged into this international relation, well, in modern time, right, in 19th century and 20th century. Well, after entering this international order, China respected and has been respecting this international order ever since entered this community. However, it is those certain countries that forgot or has forgotten the real meaning of this international relation. That is to say, equality, equal status, and sovereignty. Sovereignty means that your right or your power has a limited boundary, and that is your territory, right? So long-arm jurisdiction should be opposed because they are not respecting the principle of sovereignty. They are not respecting the principle of the territory and the national security. That's a very simple question, and that's a very simple common sense. Why are some certain countries not, let's say, understanding this? We are not kind of very clear about it. But that's the common sense, and we should, promote this common value of the equal status of a member of the international community, and we should also promote the, a community of a better future shared by the mankind. So that's the kind of, going back to the real meaning of the international order and international relation, and that's the China's contribution to the human civilization.
Right, and talking about diplomacy, Professor Wang, legislatures also have a role to play in one country's diplomacy and foreign affairs. We noticed that in a work report from the 13th NPC Standing Committee, foreign exchanges is also a highlight. Tell us more about the role of legislature in this.
Yes, I mean, I was talking earlier about the counter-reaction measures against long-arm jurisdiction by some of the hegemonic powers in the world. So that required legislation. It could also be, ministerial regulations like the unreliable entity list. But overall, as China is fully integrated into the global community, as China is facing more and more challenges in the international environment, I think sooner or later we're going to see a national legislation on foreign affairs. And in fact, the spokesperson to the 14th Party Congress mentioned this potential legislative plan to enact on foreign relations, and we don't know the details yet, but based on the observations of the past legislative processes and the ministerial regulations, I'm confident that the upcoming draft of the National Foreign Affairs legislation will incorporate many of the measures that have been already passed in the past, but also will help China establish a overarching framework through which we will look at the world and react to the actions by other countries that violate our interests, but also to set up a framework so that China can develop a more cooperative relationship with every country in the world. Because at the end of the day, cooperation is the theme of the global community, is the essence of the community that we're trying to build, which is to be shared by the mankind. Because without international cooperation, the world suffered a great deal from lack of cooperation. Look at the two world wars in the 20th century. And that's why United Nations was founded. It was founded because we needed to have a overarching international organization that can promote international cooperation. So I'm confident that the Chinese foreign affairs legislation is going to incorporate this, long-term and overarching goal of promoting international cooperation for the mankind.
Yeah, and the legislation process is one that puts vision into action. So as we speak, around 3,000 lawmakers are electing China's new lineup of leadership, including the president and the vice president. And we'll certainly keep you updated on any latest results there.
We live in a highly securitized world today, a very uncertain world in terms of global security. And China is an important country in terms of global security. And his vision, which he announced at the United Nations on the Global Security Initiative, is very important for all of us to create an environment globally that is conducive to partnership and development in a secure environment.
China's economic development has a huge impact on the world economy. China is a large country with a huge market and strong productivity. The international community is looking forward to a strong recovery of the Chinese economy and to further strengthening of international trade with China.
It is in the interest of the European Union to develop constructive, positive, and peaceful relations with China, and to keep building economic, cultural, and academic cooperation with China. And it is certainly in China's interest as well.
We see China working with all efforts in the fight fighting to the climate change, and also to make the right balance between economic development that we need and the attention for the environment, so making all this sustainable. So there is a great effort, also the setting the targets at 2060 for net zero. China has been showing that all the targets have been achieved well in advance in respect of the commitment. So we are quite confident in that respect.
You're watching CGTN. This is our special coverage on China's political season. The third plenary meeting of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress is underway at Great Hall of the People. NPC deputies are voting on and passed decision on the reform plan of state council institutions, the method on election and appointment for the 14th NPC's first session, and the name list of the chief scrutineers and other scrutineers.
The lawmakers will elect the president and vice president of the People's Republic of China, the chairperson of the Central Military Commission of China, as well as chairperson, vice chairpersons, and secretary general of the 14th NPC Standing Committee.
Now, for more insight into this process, let's get back to our studio guest. So, gentlemen, earlier we were talking about the role of the top legislature in China's overall diplomacy. Now, tell us more about your perspective on China's upcoming law on foreign affairs. Of course, that's a draft now.
Right, and there was a draft by the end of last year, and I think overall this to be passed legislation is responding to a ever more adversarial international environment, and some of the hegemonic powers in the world are still maintaining this Cold War mentality that if you win, I lose. So there is no possibility in the eyes of many of the countries in the world that we could all win, we could all gain by cooperation. And so we have seen that China is being confronted with ever more strengthening measures by some of the countries in terms of limiting exports of certain products in the high technologies, or even sanctioning Chinese companies for totally ungrounded excuses regarding human rights or etc. etc. China is not agreeing with any of the allegations, and China is not agreeing with this way of doing business in international affairs, which does not respect the spirit of cooperation. So like I said earlier, I think the foreign affairs or foreign relations legislation is going to reflect the Chinese spirit of cooperation in the international environment. It's also going to stipulate the ways of how Chinese government and Chinese individuals and businesses are going to interact with the world on various fronts. And it's not just going to be about economic security and technology, but also about cultural exchanges and other types of interactions at the people's level, which are all very important components in international affairs, international politics, which is not just about, zero-sum game and security concerns. In fact, international exchanges on the ground are extremely important, especially at this time when the world powers are in rivalry and there's an increasing distrust between and among countries for all kinds of reasons. So I'm confident that the national law on foreign affairs is going to further promote the exchanges of people, which is to further complement the overall relations between China and the rest of the world.
Professor Xia, would you like to add on that?
Well, I couldn't agree anymore with Professor Wang's opinion in the legislature about protecting our national interest. Well, at the same time of protecting China's national interest and the national security, China is also going to make law to further improve the circumstances or the condition for the foreign trade and the foreign business within China. Well, it's a weird thing that we are living in the world, we are living in the global community. We don't have a, let's say, global parliament making laws for all the members of the world acting business activity and the cultural activity. So that is why each and every sovereign country making their own laws. Well, making their own law does not necessarily mean shutting the door, does not necessarily mean punishing everyone entering their country. Well, we are making laws to provide a better condition or even better kind of equipment for the further connection and exchange between China and other countries. That is also China's, let's say, the whole process, people's democracy is meaning, because China is not going to close the door. China is going to open the door further and more widely, and to further the improvement of the exchange and the communication between China and the rest of the world. So in my opinion, to further kind of involvement into the international community can protect China's interest more. But we should have national kind of legislatures, kind of law framework to protect this interest, right?
And now, gentlemen, let's also take a look at how China's vision is being perceived by the international community. Martin Jacques is a British political analyst and former senior fellow at Cambridge University. He points out that Chinese modernization is not the same as Western modernization. Besides the common features of modernization, it has China's own characteristics as well.
Chinese modernity cannot be the same as Western modernity. That doesn't mean it doesn't share very important characteristics with Western modernity, but it is also very distinctive. And so what we're witnessing now, that China has reached an important level of development with technology developing quickly and so on, we're going to see, I think, a different kind, a very distinctive kind of Chinese modernization. The heart of high quality development is to raise the productivity of the Chinese economy. In other words, particularly, for example, the output per person. Mm-hmm. And you can only do this with a major to increase the technological input. And of course, crucial to that now is everything related to cyberspace, to the use of computers, to new technology firms in China, which have become so important within China and more widely as well. I think this is really, the next stage of development. What China is trying to offer is a comprehensive view of the way the world should develop. In other words, and it's particularly aimed in the first instance, I think, at the developing world, to offer a prospect which is not just economic, but it's about development, and it's about security, and it's about peace bound up with security, which is very important in the present situation, because we all know that what's happened is a very serious shift in Chinese-American relations, and the determination of America to try and find ways of containing and isolating China. And so the extent to which China can build bridges with lots of other countries is very important in this period. And these two initiatives, I think, can help to do that.
So, gentlemen, Chinese path to modernization. Earlier, Professor Xia mentioned that it's definitely not westernization. It cannot equal to that. But Professor Wang, tell our global audiences some of the outstanding features of China's path to modernization.
Well, if you ask me, I think I also teach international students about Chinese politics and national development, and students always ask this question, and which is not easy to answer because you don't have a recipe for national development of any country. So China is still searching for ways of, a better way, better means to, better path to modernization. But nonetheless, China has accumulated experience of how a country, a developing country, a late developer, can search for a path that best fits its own national conditions. And on that regard, I think China has some very unique and shareable experience. And to me, the most important thing is to be practical, pragmatic, to be flexible. At the same time, sticking to a foundational principle and the basic characteristics of our political systems. So if you look at the changes since Reform and Open Up era, and if you look at the constitutional amendments since 1982, every amendment to the national constitution reflected the changes of socioeconomic conditions in China, so that we are more able to establish new principles and new institutions to guide our national development. Let me give you an example. Speaking of the importance of the market power in national development, we changed dramatically in terms of our attitudes, but also in terms of the contribution of private sector to the national economy from the 1980s and on and on. For example, in 1993, I mentioned earlier that the national constitution was amended to incorporate the socialist market economy concept into the constitution. And then in early 2000, the constitution was further amended to say that the private economy is an important integrated and supplemental form of economy in the Chinese overall economic structure. And in 2005, the constitution was amended to incorporate the protection of private properties. So you see all these changes, amendments to the Constitution reflect how the government, the National People's Congress, and how the Chinese Communist Party have been constantly reviewing the changes in the society so that we update our institutions and system to these changes. That's the most important thing, because if you look at many of the so-called mature political systems in the rest of the world, they probably are too mature that they don't want to change anything. Or they wanted to change, but it's becoming so hard to make changes, even though the external conditions have changed so dramatically, which requires institutional change. But institutional change is not so often happening in many of the political systems in the world. But if you look at China, institutional reforms are happening every 5 years, and in between the National People's Congresses, you also see policy making changes. Some of them are new policies, but some of others are simply, reflecting upon the old policies to make updates.
Well, one would argue that modernization is a process in the making. It's always answering to the need of changing times, and there could be minor adjustments to policy directions, and then even on the same trajectory, things could speed up sometimes and slow down in other times. So what are some of the immediate goals for China's modernization, Professor Wang, and the ultimate objective of this process?
Right. I think the national rejuvenation is a long-term goal of the Chinese national development. But before we reach that point, there can be some major steps to be accomplished. And now that we have raised this concept of Chinese path to modernization, we have a better idea of where we have been and where we're heading. And I agree with Professor Xia just now. He was saying that the basic characteristic of Chinese path to modernization was balancing, and this is so interconnected with the traditional Chinese culture of how Chinese people view things around us, view ourselves, view the relations between us and the world, and view the entire world. So it's all of that is saying that our next levels of development will continue to adhere to this principle of balancing. So on the one hand, we want to make a bigger economic cake so that Chinese economy is further, progressing alongside other countries. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that nobody is left behind, and we needed to create a more equitable society. We needed to create a bigger middle stratum so that the Chinese, more and more Chinese people are able to enjoy the benefits of China's economic outputs.
What about some common features of modernizations in the process of history and happened in countries around the world? For example, industrialization, it's a necessity in getting modernized, if you will, Professor Xia. But let's remember, China's industrialization, as stated very clearly in the blueprint of Chinese path to modernization, it's not based on colonization. Right. It's based on self-independence. It's based on self-reliance. Tell us more about the Chinese feature in getting industrialization.
Right, this is kind of very interesting. So that is why when we talk about the Chinese path to modernization, this word, this concept, the Chinese path to modernization, is not only about the description about the future, it is also about the description about the past, right? About the Chinese way or Chinese previous effort, Chinese previous attempt to pursue the modernization. So ever since 19th century, mid-19th century, different generations of Chinese elites, they wanted China to become modernized. They wanted China to become kind of industrialized. Well, back then they didn't have a lot of resources. They didn't have a lot of kind of material. So the only way for them was to learn from the West, to learn from the already industrialized, the developed countries and powers. However, back then the international situation was not that favorable to China. So that is why China did endure some kind of, struggles or this kind of weakness or some kind of setbacks in its own way to pursue the modernization. But Chinese people or Chinese authority never forget that the real path to the so-called industrialized societies or the so-called industrial developed society, their base of their modernization was, colonization, was taking other countries' resources, taking other countries' market, even taking other countries' people, even taking other countries' let's say jobs. So it is not the way China is going to take. It is a way we should criticize, and this is not the right way to modernization. So Chinese path to modernization is a generalization, is a description of Chinese past, and it is also setting the agenda for the other developing countries. So this is not the way that you should follow. The Western way is not the way you should follow. Chinese way is some kind of the way you should, not follow, but you should kind of consult or taking some kind of suggestion from China. So I would argue that China's path to modernization meeting is not only about China, it's about developing countries, it's about the rest of the world. That is why we are going to build a community of a shared future, because we didn't have the shared past, but we may have a shared future, right? So it is the feature of China's past to modernization.
Right, gentlemen, let's get more on this. China is the world's largest consumer of energy, but the way forward is a focus on maintaining growth while protecting the environment. So how is China modernizing while prioritizing green development? Xu Xingchen reports.
Electricity fuels industrialization, yet humans are facing an unprecedented energy crisis. Ensuring energy generation is green and sustainable has become crucial as countries modernize. In China, water is becoming one of the answers to the question of clean and abundant energy. Thanks to Mother Nature, water plus gravity helps generate electricity with zero carbon emission.
This is the Baihetan hydropower station, which became fully operational at the end of 2022. The generating capacity of this dam is only second to the Three Gorges Dam in the world, another engineering marvel built by China on its journey towards sustainability.
I had to pay a visit inside.
Now we're seeing the heart of the hydropower station, which is our 1 million kilowatt power generating unit. This unit is a big beast, 50 meters tall with a weight over 8,000 tons. That is heavier than the Eiffel Tower. But despite its huge size, in fact, it is the core and the most precise equipment in our entire power station, and even the most sophisticated equipment made for the hydropower industry. The coaxiality deviation of the main shaft of the water turbine below us and the generator above is less than 0.015 millimeters, which is thinner than a string of hair.
This is far more precise compared to the global standardized tolerance of 0.3 millimeters. Water moves the turbine linking the generator, transforming the movement into electricity.
The power generating unit in Baihetan, developed and engineered in China, has the world's largest capacity per unit. And there are 16 of these units that can generate enough power over the course of a year for 75 million people.
Thanks to China's ultra-high voltage grid, the clean electricity from Baihetan can reach Shanghai over 2,000 kilometers away, fast and easy.
The ultra-high voltage grid allows for electricity to be transported across great distances. Green development also reflects how our Chinese path to modernization differs from Western modernizations. One of the most important aspects is how China emphasizes harmonious development between man and nature while pursuing modernization.
The transition to green energy fuels China's path to modernity. The country believes a march into modernity needs harmonious development between man and nature. China's leadership has shown its determination to protect the environment while maintaining fast growth. And the country is working to meet its goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2060. Progress is being made. Data suggests that China contributed 40% of global carbon emission reduction in 2022. Xu Xingchen, CGTN, Sichuan Province.
Yeah, and green development is also a very important part of China's modernization drive. And
exactly.
China has made considerable efforts in trying to improve its ecology, as well as boosting biodiversity, as we saw at that biodiversity conference in Yunnan. So, what are some of the changes that have been most notable to you in terms of boosting sustainable and green development?
Well, we have seen more and more, let's say, blue skies in the days with blue skies, and we have clearer airs, and we even have a clearer, let's say, infrastructure, living conditions. I would like to raise one example. During these 10 years, I always bring my students to some other remote areas and villages in the southern provinces to let's do some kind of field work, to do some kind of rural investigation. But my students, they were born from the urban area, and they didn't, get used to those kind of rural condition. And I would like to say almost 10 years ago, when we went to visit some of the certain country, we didn't dare to go out after 7 p.m. because back then at night it was very dark. There was no light in the village. There was only one light in the village kind of office, so we can only live there and discuss there, and there is no kind of the signal of the the cell phone. Well, after 5 years, I revisited this country, the village with my students and recollect some kind of the data, the rural investigation. Well, the villagers told us that they had a better infrastructure, they had a lot of lights, and they had a lot of, let's say, the equipment in terms of the signal of a cell phone. So let's say you can go outside even after 9 o'clock at night, and it's very secure, it's very safe in our kind of rural area. So that's the improvement of the living condition of rural area, basically due to the improvement of ecological the natural and ecological circumstances. And it is not only about the preservation of a natural environment, it is also the preservation of the entire the world kind of the circumstances. And I think it is also remarkable in this kind of achievement.
Well, Professor Xia, let me follow up on that. Since you've done field research in this particular regard, many are wondering, yes, of course, environment matters so much in China's future development and also for people's living condition, living standards. But many are wondering, for rural areas, there used to be many collective production facilities, factories, small factories. If you close all that down, how would you deal with employment in the rural part of China, and how will people get a better livelihood through the closure of that and the getting better of the environment?
Very interesting question. One of my colleagues in IUC, he was a professor in the School of Rural kind of Management and Agriculture. His argument is very kind of sounding. He argues that we couldn't hire each and every people in rural area into the factory, right? We should allow some kind of agriculture to develop. And even nowadays, even in the future, agriculture is essential to a country's development. We still need people to grow rice, but not in a traditional way, but we can use a kind of modernized way, industrialized way to grow rice, to preserve our grain kind of harvest, to preserve our kind of different kind of vegetables and even the fruits. So that is also essential to people's life. And he argues that even if we close down some kind of small factories and the small, let's say, the workshops in rural area, that does not mean those people lose their job. Those people still have their job, but this job is not in the industrial, the industry or heavy industry. Those people's jobs are in agriculture. And by closing down this small factory, because they are under the standard of this kind of industrialization, it is also a way to protect the weak or the very vulnerable natural circumstances in rural areas. So it is both benefit to national economic development and the national environmental development.
So a transformation of mindset, really.
Right. Transformation of mindset.
Well, Xi Jinping envisioned different aspects of China's development going forward. For example, the Beautiful China Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Development Initiative. So, Professor Wang, I'd like to ask you this. What are some of the defining criteria for the Beautiful China Initiative in trying to put the country on track for sustainable development while also ensuring its economic growth?
That's right. And we mentioned earlier about the Chinese path to modernization, and one of the most important things is balancing. So on the one hand, we aim very high. We wanted to have better policies to preserve the national ecology and to increase national biodiversity and to pursue the green revolution and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that all these efforts and actions are taken on a good pace so that we're not ruining our existing economic structure. And like Panding just mentioned, that if you carry out a green revolution in the rural countryside so fast that in the end there can be negative consequences. So we got to be careful all the time to maintain this balance. And back to your question about the criteria, and we're having very specified targets on various fronts of the green development and on biodiversity and on decarbonization. For example, we set up this long-term goal of carbon neutrality by 2060 and the carbon peak by 2035. And following up on that, we have set up a division of indicators for various sectors, And then following up on that, we're talking about indicators for the businesses, enterprises, manufacturers who have to, accomplish certain responsibility and on a yearly basis to reach the indicators of decarbonization, so that in the end, by 2035, we are able to reach this longer term goal of green development. And I also wanted to share a sector that China is really taking the lead in on the world level, which is the development of electric vehicles. And Chinese automobile industry has been developing for decades, but it really in the past decade we've seen that a lot of the newly formed or collaborated electric vehicle manufacturers have risen up, not only within the Chinese market, but also on the global market as well. So now, for example, in Beijing, we're talking about every 1/3 of the new cars sold every day in Beijing, they're electric vehicles. And now building an electric
Well,
vehicle.
gentlemen, I'm afraid we have to leave you there. The third plenary meeting of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress is underway at the Great Hall of the People.
Now the meeting resumes. According to report from the chief scrutineer, ballot count results are ready for announcement. Now the staff will announce the election result for the election of the President of the People's Republic of China. Ballot count result for the election of President of PRC. 2,952 ballots were issued, 2,952 recovered, of which 2,952 are valid. The candidate for this post, Mr. Xi Jinping, has 2,952 votes in favor of him. Now I declare that Comrade Xi Jinping is elected President of the People's Republic of China. Now, the staff will announce the results for the election of the chairman of the Central Military Commission. Ballot count result for the election of the chairman of the Central Military Commission of the People's Republic of China. 2,952 ballots were issued, 2,952 were recovered, of which 2,952 are valid. The candidate, Mr. Xi Jinping, has 2,952 votes in favor of him. End of the announcement. Now I declare that Comrade Xi Jinping is elected as chairman of the Central Military Commission of the People's Republic of China. Now the staff will announce the ballot count result for the election of the chairman of the 14th NPC Standing Committee. Ballot count result for the election of the chairman of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress. 2,952 ballots were issued. 2,952 were recovered, of which 2,952 are valid. The candidate, Zhao Leji, has 2,952 votes in favor of him. Now I declare that Comrade Zhao Leji is elected chairman of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress.
Now the staff will announce the voting results for the election of the Vice Chairman of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress. The election results are as followed. We issued 2,952 ballots, recovered 2,952 ballots, 2,952 ballots are valid. The candidate of the Vice President of the People's Republic of China, Comrade Han Zheng, received 2,952 affirmative votes. Now the staff, I will announce that Comrade Han Zheng has been elected as the Vice President of the People's Republic of China. Now the staff will announce the voting results for the election of the Vice Chairman of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress. The election results for the Vice Chairman of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress are as followed. We have issued 2,952 ballots, recovered 2,952 ballots, 2,952 ballots are valid. For the candidates, 李鸿忠affirmative votes 2,950, 1 vote against, and also 1 abstention vote. Wang Dongling 2,952 affirmative votes. Xiao Jie 2,952 affirmative votes. Zheng Jianbang 2,952 affirmative votes. Ding Zhongli 2,952 affirmative votes. Hao Mingjing 2,952 affirmative votes. Cai Dafeng 2,952 affirmative votes. He Wei 2,952 affirmative votes. Wu Weihua 2,952 affirmative votes. Tie Ning 2,952 affirmative votes. Peng Qinghua 2,952 affirmative votes. Zhang Qingwei 2,952 affirmative votes. Luo Sangjiangcun 2,952 affirmative votes. 雪克莱提扎克尔 2,952 affirmative votes. For the candidate for the Secretary General, we have issued 2,952 ballots. 2,952 ballots were recovered. 2,952 are valid. For the candidate, Liu Qi had received 2,952 affirmative votes. I announce that Li Hongzhong, Wang Dongming, Xiao Jie, Zheng Jianbang, Ding Zhongli, Hao Mingjing, Cai Dafeng, He Wei, Wu Weihua, Tie Ning, Peng Qinghua, Zhan Qingwei, 洛三江村 雪克莱提 扎克 have been elected as the Vice Chairman of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress. I announce that Comrade Liu Qi is elected as the Secretary General of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress. Deputies, we have completed all the agenda items for today's morning section. After the meeting, the Presidium will issue a notice to release all the election results. According to the measures on taken oath of allegiance to the Constitution for the first session of the 14th National People's Congress, now we will proceed to the ceremony of taking oath of allegiance to the Constitution. We now hold the ceremony of taking oath of allegiance to the Constitution for the first section of the 14th National People's Congress. Play the national anthem. Please all rise. Please escort the Constitution of the People's Republic of China to the meeting. Please sing the national anthem of the People's Republic of China.
Now,
the President of the People's Republic of China and the Chairman of the Central Military Commission of PRC, Comrade Xi Jinping, will take the oath. Please take the oath. I pledge my allegiance to the Constitution of the People's Republic of China, to safeguard the Constitution authority, fulfill my legal obligations, be loyal to the country and the people, be committed and honest in my duty, accept the people's supervision, and work for a great modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. Xi Jinping. Please be seated. Now, the Chairman of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress, Comrade Zhao Leji, will take the oath.
请宣誓。
Please take your oath.
我宣誓。忠于
I pledge my allegiance to the Constitution of the People's Republic of China, to safeguard the Constitution authority, fulfill my legal obligations, be loyal to the country and the people, be committed and honest in my duty, accept the people's supervision, and work for a great modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. Oath taker 赵乐际。
现在请中华人民共和国副主席韩正
Vice President of the People's Republic of China, Mr. Han Zheng, will take his oath.
请宣誓。
Please take your oath.
我宣誓，忠于中
I
华人
pledge my
民共和
allegiance
国宪法，维护宪法权威，
to the Constitution of the People's Republic of China,
忠于
to
祖国，
safeguard the Constitution
忠于人民，
authority, fulfill my legal
恪尽职守，
obligations, be loyal to the
严决
country
奉公，
and the people, be
接受
committed
人民
and
监督，
honest in my duty,
为建设
accept the people's
富强
supervision, and work
民主
for a great
文明
modern
和
socialist
谐
country
美
that
丽
is
的
prosperous,
社会主义
strong,
现代化强
democratic,
国
culturally
努力奋
advanced,
斗
harmonious, and
宣誓人
beautiful.
韩正。
Oath taker Han Zheng.
"现在请中华人民共和国第14届全国人民代表大会常务委员
Vice
会
Chairman
副委
of
员
the
长
Standing Committee
李鸿忠、
of the 14th NPC,
王东明、
Mr. Li Hongzhong,
肖捷、
Wang Dongming, Xiao
郑
Jie,
建邦、
Zheng Jianbang,
丁仲礼、
Ding Zhongli,
郝明金、
Hao Mingjing,
蔡达峰、
Cai Dafeng,
何为、
He Wei,
武维华、
Wu Weihua,
铁宁、
Tie Ning,
彭清华、
Peng Qinghua,
张庆伟、
Zhang Qingwei,
洛桑江村、
Luo Sang Cun,
雪克莱提扎克尔、
Xue Kelai扎
秘
克尔
书长刘琦
and
宣誓，
Secretary Liu Qi will take their
由李
oath.
鸿忠领事。
Mr. Li Hongzhong will lead the oath-taking ceremony.
"请宣誓人就位。
Please be ready for the oath-taking ceremony.
请宣誓。
Please take your oath.
我宣誓。我宣誓。
I pledge my allegiance to the Constitution of the People's Republic of China, to safeguard the constitutional authority, fulfill my legal obligations, be loyal to the country and the people, be committed and honest in my duty, accept the people's supervision, and work for a great modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. This is the end of oath-taking ceremony.
The deputies at the third plenary meeting of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress have elected Xi Jinping as President of the People's Republic of China and Chairman of Central Military Commission of the country. For the 14th NPC Standing Committee, Zhao Leji has been elected Chairman. Vice chairpersons were also elected. Liu Qi has been elected Secretary General of the 14th NPC Standing Committee. Han Zheng has been elected Vice President of the People's Republic of China. Now, for more insight, let's talk to our studio guest. Gentlemen, what do you make of the significance of constitutional oath-taking ceremony, Mr. Xi?
Well, this is ceremony. It's more of a political ritual, showing to the Chinese people, showing to the rest of the China, and even outside of the rest of the world, that China is doing everything obeying the law. China is making a law-based government, a law-based society, and law-based governance, and also to safeguard the constitutional authority. This is also a very good kind of circumstances for legal education for each and every citizen of China. Right?
Yes, and it was a solemn moment there. We are seeing senior leaders taking the oath of allegiance to the constitutions. What are some of the lines, Professor Wang, that stood out to you most, and why are they important for the senior leaders in fulfilling their future duties?
Right, like you said, it was a very solemn moment, and it was also a critical moment. Where after the elections, the senior leaders of the Chinese newly elected senior leaders of the Chinese government make important commitments to the nation, to the people, and to the constitution. And no other way of making such a commitment is better than doing this in front of the constitution, because the constitution is the foundation of the Chinese nation, and it's the foundation for all the other laws, regulations, in public policies. So making a serious and critical commitment to the to the entire Chinese nation in front of the Constitution makes this entire process, very, very procedural, and also offers a very high degree of legitimacy for the national government, and it also gives confidence to the Chinese people that the newly elected leadership in the national government will certainly do their best to serve the country.
And China is entering a new era of development, a new stage of development. So these set of leaders will be faced with pretty much a different situation than the previous government. What are some of the immediate priorities to be addressed?
Well, one of the priorities is to pursue the high quality development decided by the 20th National Congress, the 20th National Congress of Party last year, and also even the 14th five-year plan for the high quality development. Well, when we talk about the high quality development, actually the essence is actually strictly defined. High quality development should be followed by a people-oriented development, and should be, let's say, conducted in a sharing way, in the kind of innovative way, and in a green way, and in a development way, and also in this kind of open way. So high quality development does not necessarily mean the increase of the data or the increase of the the GDP, this kind of thing. It also means that the further or substantial improvement of people's life, substantial improvement of Chinese governability, state governability, and especially the improvement of China's social governance and the social, let's say, development. So this might be the priorities for the new term of senior leaders for China. Right.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your insight.
Thank you.
And the third plenary meeting of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress has concluded. The NPC will hold another plenary meeting tomorrow to confirm more appointments. The deputies will decide on the president's nomination for premier, and they will decide on the vice chairpersons and members of the Central Military Commission of the country.
And the legislators will also elect the director of the National Commission of Supervision, as well as the heads of the Supreme People's Court and the Supreme People's Procuratorate.
The members of the 14th NPC Standing Committee will also be elected at that meeting. So do stay tuned to CGTN for our special coverage.
And that concludes our special coverage for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Stay tuned.